If you're a parent or share a fridge with someone, Instacart is about to make grocery shopping so much easier. Because with family carts, you can share a cart with your partner and each add the items you want. Since between the two of you, odds are you'll both remember everything you need. And this way, you'll never have to eat milkless cereal again. So minimize the stress of the weekly shop with family carts. Download the Instacart app and get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes. Plus, enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 orders. Service fees apply. For 3 orders in 14 days, excludes restaurants.
Rakuten is the smartest way to save money when you shop because you earn cash back at over 3,500 stores. Fashion, beauty, electronics, home essentials, travel, dining, concert tickets, and more. Your favorite stores like Lowe's, Levi's, and Nike pay Rakuten to send them shoppers. And Rakuten then passes on a part of that payment to its members as cash back. You're already shopping at your favorite stores. Why not save while you're doing it? It's a no-brainer. Membership is free and easy to sign up. Get the Rakuten app now and join the 17 million members who are already saving. Cashback rates change daily. See Rakuten.com for details. That's Rakuten. Your cash back really adds up.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 101 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, what is going on?
What's happening, man?
Love that show, What's Happening.
What's happening?
Man,
that's the new version.
No, I'm doing great.
Great.
Had a good week. Spent a lot of time on this West Memphis case. It's such a juggernaut. With the amount of information that's out there and trying to figure out, okay, what do we put in? What is being speculated so much that I really don't want to talk about that because there's no right or wrong answer on some of this stuff. But it's interesting. Like I said, I've always been fascinated by this case, and we're going to get into it for sure.
Well, that's good.
But before we do, let's do our Patreon shout out.
Yeah, we need to.
We had Lisa Dawn.
Thanks, Lisa.
Miriam Zavala.
Oh, Zavala, thank you.
Sam
Perechko.
Celine Desjardins.
Desjardins? Yeah, I like that.
Amanda Fatante. Mole Sarkis.
Hey, Mole.
April Allen.
Hey.
Kiamesha Johnson. Kiamesha. Stephanie.
Hey, Steph.
Alicia Wolf.
Thanks, Alicia.
Darren Mahoney.
Hey, Darren.
Andre Henriksen.
Hendrickson.
Helena Wright.
Hey, Helena.
Patrick McCormick.
Hey, thanks, Patrick.
Allison.
Hey, Allie.
Shannon Gormley.
Gormley. Yeah.
Linda.
Just Linda.
Shannon Hayes.
Thanks, Shannon.
Linda Farber.
Thanks, Linda.
Ramondo Roby.
Ooh, Ramondo. That's all. That's it
like
right
that
there.
one.
I do.
Wendy Horn.
Hey, Wendy.
Laura Jane Hashino.
Hashino. And
Marissa Saracina.
Saracina.
Everything's Italian to you.
Absolutely.
Whether it sounds...
doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Then if we go back into the vault, Gibbs.
Let's do it.
This week we selected Scarin.
Or Scararina.
Or S. Karen.
Or S. Karen.
It looks like Scarin. Could be S. Karen. I don't know.
Scarin.
She's been with us such a long time, though. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Appreciate the new support, the continued support. We had a lot of PayPal support as well.
Did we?
We had Molly Hildebrand.
Hey, thanks, Molly.
Heather Allen.
Hey, Heather.
Raven Marks.
Hey, Raven.
Phyllis Ekoff.
Hey, thanks, Phyllis.
And Carrie Boyce.
Carrie, thank you.
So right now, Gibbs, on True Crime All the Time.
Yeah.
We have out the story of the murder of Nikki Vanderhayden. Some strange things going on in this murder investigation, the trial.
I really like the electronic part.
Oh, yeah. The use of electronic technology, because this case is not all that old.
No.
The murder occurred in 2016. The trial really just happened last year. So when you start talking about all of the electronic technology that we use today,
right?
Our cell phones, Fitbits.
Yeah.
They are tracking a lot of our movements, personal data, things like that. This is a case where they utilize those things to figure out who committed this murder. So definitely check that out. We have some new merch out on the store, so check that out if you hadn't already. New t-shirts. There's some new leggings.
Well, you got them on. They look good on you.
Magnets. I am not wearing the T-Cat leggings, but there's some new stuff out there.
Yeah.
Check it out. So I'm ready to jump right in, Gibbs, if you are.
Let's do it.
This is part 2 of the story of the murders of Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers, as well as the story of the West Memphis 3, right? It's all connected, but it is part 2. So if you have not listened to part 1 yet, I would strongly suggest you go back and listen to that first. This will make a heck of a lot more sense. So in the last episode, part 1, we covered the murders of these 3 8-year-olds. We talked about the crime scene. We talked about the coroner's findings, which suggested sexual mutilation of at least one of the boys. And we spent some time talking about this West Memphis area that was in a state of panic. I think you'd have to say it was in a state of satanic panic.
That's exactly what I would say.
And it wasn't just West Memphis, right? We're talking about West Memphis, Arkansas, but it was kind of going around in a lot of areas of the country. As it relates to this case, I think when you talk about the authorities, they thought, you know what? This has to be the work of satanic worshipers, Satanists. Who else, Gibbs, could be capable of murdering 3 innocent 8-year-old boys? So the suspicion of authorities fell very quickly onto 18-year-old Damien Echols. Damien's friend, 16-year-old Jason Baldwin, got caught up in it, as did 17-year-old Jessie Misskelley Jr. All 3 were interviewed by police, but it was really Jessie's confession on June 3rd, 1993 that sealed the fate of these 3 teenagers. At the end of the last episode, we left off with a small soundbite from Jessie's interview, but we have got to dive into it because, to me, Jessie's interview is kind of the key, right? It's really what sets this whole thing into motion. So I said, Jessie was 17 years old. He's a minor. So police had to talk to his father first. During this conversation, they said that they wanted to talk to Jessie about Damien Echols. Remember, that's who they think is involved. We spent a lot of time in the first part talking about that. There is a question of exactly what type of permission Jessie's father gave. He has said that he didn't give permission for the police to interrogate or question his son. The police say he did. A lot of people think he did. It was reported that during this conversation police had with Jessie and his dad, they said that Jessie would get the reward money if he helped out in the investigation. And it was pretty considerable. I think it was $30,000, $35,000 maybe at this time. That's a lot of money for somebody like Jessie and his family.
Big money.
We talked about these 3 boys. None of them came from any money whatsoever. We talked about his low IQ, somewhere around 70, 72, something like that. Much like yourself, Gibbs, his highest level of education was the 9th grade. I don't know that many people know that about you, but I'm outing you right now.
Is that what you're doing? Yet I ended up going to one of the top universities in the country.
Well, what I didn't say is you were Doogie Howser. So after the 9th grade, they figured, you know what? This guy's a freaking genius.
Send him now.
Just let him skip the last 3. We'll give him his diploma, send him straight to Harvard. That's the part I left out.
And it worked out pretty well.
It has worked out really well.
Then I went over to Princeton and I did some janitor at night, but I would
you solve this equation
every now and then.
On the board.
I'd walk by people and say, "How you like those apples?" Yeah, it was good times.
It's worked out okay for you.
Yeah.
Now, during this interrogation, Jessie was alone. He was also given a polygraph test that police said he failed. His interrogation was conducted by 2 officers, Detective Brian Ridge and Inspector Gary Gitchell. And I think I mentioned in the last episode, this would be a heavily scrutinized interrogation. And I definitely want to spend some time talking about why that is. There's a lot going on in this discussion. So I think what we want to do is touch on the most controversial aspects. So very early on in the conversation, Jessie puts himself with Damien Echols and Jason Baldwin in the woods behind the Blue Beacon truck wash early on the morning of May 5th. But we know the 3 boys were in school that day until about 3 o'clock. And to me, timing is everything in this case. First Jessie has them at the park at 9. Then later on in the questioning, Detective Ridge asked him what time they were in the park. This time Jessie says about noon. Still, the boys would have been in school. Also, it's documented that Jason Baldwin was confirmed to have been in school that day. I think he was the only one that went to school. He was 16 years old. He was a good student. We talked about that. So after Jessie says this, Detective Ridge says, okay, was it after school had let out? This is immediately following Jessie saying it was around noon. So what I'm getting at, and you can see this in the progression of this interrogation, you can see them trying to, I guess for a lack of a better word, walk Jessie later in time, trying to get his time frame of when they're there later and later, frankly, because they knew it couldn't have happened before 3.
Right.
Right, Gibbs?
So they got to get this time frame into something that makes logical sense.
Well, for it to be of any value to them, they have to, right? They can't have a confession that says this thing happened at 9, this thing happened at 12. That's not going to do them any good. At one point in the confession, Jessie says that the 3 boys skipped school that day. And his exact quote was, they were going to catch their bus and stuff, and they was on their bikes. And this is strange. I mean, we know for a fact they didn't skip school. Secondly, Gibbs, what little kid rides their bike to catch the school bus?
Not too many.
Well, what are you going to do? It doesn't make sense. You're not going to leave your precious bike at the school bus stop for someone to come along and steal.
Right.
You think it's going to be waiting on you when you get off the bus when you come home? It's not. So later on, one of the investigators asked Jessie about something that happened in the park that night, and he goes with it. Something that happened in the park that night. Again, you can see them trying to work up to a time that could possibly work. So there's a few things to point out here that were already known, already out in the media that everybody knew. One is the location behind the Blue Beacon truck wash. The second is that the boys were riding their bikes. And then a third is some of the injuries to the boys' body. And it's important, right? It's important to know what was out in the media, just like you and I always talk about, right? When you are talking to a suspect, especially one that's giving you a confession, you'd like to know the things that only they could know. So Inspector Gitchell jumps in at one point and he asks Jessie what time he got there. This is after he'd already talked about 9 o'clock. He'd already talked about 12 o'clock. Jessie tells him 9 a.m.
What time was it that you were actually there in the park?
I was there about 12.
About noon? Okay. Was it after school? Had let out?
I didn't go to school.
What, these other boys?
They skipped school.
They skipped
They
school.
was going to catch their bus or stuff, and they was on their bikes.
Now, did you say the boys skipped school that day? These little boys did? Are you sure?
They was going to catch going somewhere, and like I said, Damien and them left before I did. I told them I'd meet them there and stuff. I had to get ready and stuff. I'd meet them there. And it was early in the morning, so they went ahead and met me up. They went ahead and went up there, and then I came up, later on behind them.
What time did you get there?
I got there about 9.
In the morning?
Mm-hmm.
Of Wednesday morning?
Mm-hmm.
And
What time is it right now?
Right now?
Yeah. You don't know what time it is?
do you not wear a watch?
It's at home.
So
My dad woke me up this morning.
your time period might not be exactly right what you're saying.
Right.
But it was like early in the day, but you don't know exactly what time. Okay. Because I've got some real confusion with the times you're telling me.
And he's right to have a lot of confusion about the times. I mean, let's be honest, Gibbs. That didn't make a whole lot of sense.
It didn't. It was all over the place.
I mean, take out the times altogether. It's, Jessie is operating at such a low mental capacity. A lot of times when he is talking, it's hard to make sense of what he's saying. But he does clearly say multiple times, I was there at 9. Then he says 12. But at no point so far as he said, we were there at night, which is when they believe the murders took place, or, had to be at least after 6:30 after the last known sighting of the boys. But what's interesting is that in this part of the interview, Gitchell says, I got some real discrepancies, with the things that you're telling me, but he doesn't come back right then and there, try to nail down the time. At one point in the interview, Jessie said the boys were tied up with rope, even though it was known that they were tied up with shoelaces. Jessie says a number of times that he left after chasing down Michael Moore and bringing him back. But the investigators keep asking Jessie about very specific things that happened after he says he left. And he just goes on trying to answer their questions. He says that both Damien and Jason punched the boys and, in his words, bruised them up real bad. That's what Jessie said. That gives from the number of people that you've probably hit in your life, which could be substantial.
We don't talk about it. You
don't just hit someone, stand back and see this big bruise.
Right.
It doesn't happen that way. It takes time for a bruise to develop. Sure. Jessie also said that both Damien and Jason sexually assaulted the boys, and he provides very graphic descriptions of oral and anal sexual attacks.
Let me ask you something. This is real serious, and I want you to be real truthful. And I want you to think about it before you answer it. Don't just say yes or no real quick. I want you to think about it. Did you actually hit any of these boys?
No.
Now tell us the truth.
No.
Okay. Did you actually rape any of these boys?
No.
Did you actually kill any of these boys?
No.
Did you see any of the boys actually killed?
Yes.
Okay. Which one did you see killed?
That right there.
You're pointing to the Byers boy again?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And how was he actually killed?
He choked him real bad, like.
Choking him. Okay. What was he choking him with?
It's like a stick. It's a little stick, and kind of holding it over his neck.
Okay. So he was choking him to the point where he actually went unconscious. So at that point, you feel like he was dead?
Yeah.
Now, one of the big questions that comes up is around how long Jessie was interrogated on June the 3rd. a lot of places listed as 12 hours. But I couldn't square that, Gibbs, in the research. Jessie appears to be at the police station around 9 a.m. and the officers talk to him for, almost 6 hours before they ever turn on any recording device.
That's a lot of time.
It is.
Without having something on to verify what you're talking about.
So when you hear the recording, one of the officers gives the time as 2:44. And then at the end, they say it concludes at 3:18. It's about 34 minutes of actual recorded time. And a lot of people have an issue with that, asking, why would that be? Did police only turn it on once they were ready for Jessie's confession? A lot of people argue that it's because things were rehearsed in the almost 6 hour period of time before the tape was turned on. And that's a scary thought if it's true, because Jessie didn't seem to tell a story that fit the narrative police were looking for, or fit the facts of the crime scene, for that matter. So if they rehearsed it for a very long time, the final production, or whatever you want to call it,
right,
wasn't very good.
Not good at all, really.
And again, I think it's clear from the tape and from the transcribed notes of parts of the interview that are not on tape that they're leading him at times. Jessie says the boys were killed around noon, but obviously we know that couldn't be true. They're in school. He says 9 a.m. We know that can't be true. And then you have the discrepancies regarding the punching and Jessie saying that he saw them all bruised up. He said that the boys were sexually assaulted, cut with a knife, choked. But the coroner's report doesn't corroborate all of that, right? It mentions lacerations. It does mention some things like that. Now, sometime after the first recorded interview, they talked to Jessie again to clarify some things. This is often referred to as Jessie's clarifying statement. And in this session, Gary Gitchell asks Jessie again what time he was in the woods. And this time, Gibbs, he says 5 or 6. So again, we've worked our way up from 9 a.m. to 12 a.m. Now we're in the 5, 6 p.m. time frame. Gitchell says, you told me earlier it was around 7 or 8. Which time is it? Jessie responds with 7 or 8.
It walked him all the way there.
So now we're in a time frame that could possibly make sense. But when you read the transcripts, there's hundreds of questions that were asked of Jessie. A lot of them were yes or no questions. And the ones that weren't, a lot of them were, it's almost like he was parroting.
Yeah.
Whatever they asked is what he said. Just like that. Gitchell says, earlier you told me it was 7 or 8. Which time was it? Jessie says 7 or 8. But obviously there's a lot of talking going on in the hours that Jessie was at the station, and only a small part of it is on audio. But there's no doubt that the time that Jessie says that they were in the woods creeps up as the day goes on, as he's being interrogated. 9, 12, 5, 6, 7, 8.
It's a big difference.
It's huge.
It's one thing to say, it might have been around 5, maybe 7. I don't know. Okay, 8 o'clock. But when you start in the early morning and go 12 hours, that's a big spread.
Yeah, and I think you can hear Gary Gitchell kind of laying the framework for it by stating that Jessie really doesn't have a good grasp of time. By asking him, what time is it right now? What? You don't have a watch? You don't know what time it is right now? Now, what Jessie did talk about in great detail was the fact that he, Damien, and Jason were in a cult. He talked about it. He talked about the ritualistic sacrificing of animals. He talked about eating parts of the animals, orgies in the woods with girls. Towards the end of that recorded part of the interview, the officers asked Jessie what all 3 of them were wearing, and he describes what they were wearing that day. Then they asked Jessie what happened to the shoes that he was wearing that day. And he said he lent them to a friend named Buddy Lucas. So now all of a sudden, this brings Buddy Lucas onto police radar, and they questioned him several times. The first time, he said Jessie had given him a pair of shoes, but it was several months before the murders. At a subsequent interview, Lucas said not only did Jessie give him the shoes he was wearing the day of the murders, he said Jessie also confessed to him that he was there when the 3 boys were murdered. Now, Buddy Lucas later recanted this statement and said that police pressured him into giving evidence against Jessie by saying that if he didn't, he was going to go to jail. He also said that the shoes he turned over to police weren't even the ones that Jessie had given him months prior to the murders. He just gave him a pair of shoes. So I don't know what you think, Gibbs, but it seems to me, after going through the research into this confession, that Jessie was just trying to give police what they wanted without really putting himself into much of the action.
Yeah.
Minimizing his role.
Not mixing himself in.
Right. But saying what he thought police wanted to hear. Damien and Jason hit the boys. Damien and Jason cut them, raped them. The only thing that Jessie admits to doing is chasing Michael Moore down and bringing him back to Damien and Jason. Then he tries several times to say that he left after that. Even though, like I said, he does answer police questions that make it seem as though he was there during more of what happened. The bottom line to me is that he pointed the finger at Echols and Baldwin, but he also managed to incriminate himself at the same time. And I don't think this is something he was trying to do. I really believe that Jessie thought he could talk to police, tell them what they wanted to hear, and you know what? He would be on his way.
Maybe a lot richer with a wad full of reward money. I mean, there was some discussion between, him and his dad about getting a brand new truck. So,
yeah, I think he wanted the money, and I think he knew to get the money, he had to help the police. But I think he thought he could do it in a way where he wouldn't be involved. But when you tell police that you tracked down one of the boys and grabbed him, brought him back to the people that you are saying are the killers, you're not walking away scot-free. That's not going to happen.
Mm-mm.
The 3 were arrested on June 3rd, the same day that Jessie gave his confession. Jessie was arrested, late that afternoon after his confession was completed. Echols and Baldwin were arrested later that night at Damien's house. All 3 would be charged in the deaths of Christopher Byers, Michael Moore, and Stevie Branch.
According to the published report, Misskelley told police he watched 18-year-old Damien Echols and 16-year-old Jason Baldwin brutalize the children with a club and a knife. The report says Misskelley told police Echols and Baldwin raped one of the boys and sexually mutilated another as part of a cult ritual. Misskelley is quoted as saying he did not take part in the rape and mutilation, but that he helped subdue one victim who tried to escape. At a press conference, Inspector Gary Gitchell said the case against the accused teens is very strong.
Scale of 1 to 10, how solid do you think the case is?
11.
It appears satanic worship may have played a role in the murders. Since the very beginning of the investigation, people all around West Memphis have come forward with stories of satanic cults.
Reverend Tommy Stacy's church is down the street from where the bodies were found. 1 year ago, Damien Echols told the church's youth minister he had a pact with the devil and he was going to hell.
So there's a couple things I like there. Number one, you get to hear a little bit more of Gary Gitchell.
Yeah.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you? 11. He gives this big smirk. The crowd cheers.
Pretty famous clip.
It is.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't blame them. They would be happy to know or to believe that the police have caught the killers of these 3 young boys. But then as you go on, you hear in this news report, starts talking about satanic rituals, and you really get into the area of satanic panic.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. It's exactly what that broadcast did towards the end.
I do think one important thing to point out is that Jessie recanted his confession pretty quickly. After, I think, Gibbs, he realized he was not going home. He said he was tired and the police had intimidated and coerced him into making his statement. So these 3 teenagers are in jail, charged with these murders, and they go to their very first court appearance, and there were fireworks. Stevie Branch, the father of Stevie Branch, at one point, he bolted out of his seat and he charged at Damien Echols and shouted, "I'll chase you all the way to hell. I'll see you dead." Now, he didn't get to Damien because authorities restrained him before he could get there, but it did delay the proceedings. And then, there are reports, Gibbs, there were hundreds of people outside of the courtroom shouting at these teenagers, baby killers, shoot them, kill them all. It was a mob-like mentality.
Well, yeah, I think because of the Satan scare.
I think because of that, also because of the fact that it was 3 young boys.
That, majorly, sure.
And the police had come out and said, you heard him say, the case is very strong. I call it an 11.
Yeah, out of 10, I got 11 here. That's how sure I am these boys did this.
Now, when we get into the trial, it's not going to be an 11 by any stretch of the imagination. But that's what people were hearing on TV, along with the fact that they're Satan worshipers and they're in a cult. And
I think the public in general probably believes that when you're arrested and the prosecution takes you to trial, that you're probably guilty. I would say that generally that's the belief.
Well, I can honestly say, before you and I started these podcasts, especially the Unsolved, where we started to get into the wrongful convictions, I definitely thought, okay, if they're putting this guy on trial, they have the evidence to put him away. But then you learn, okay, not that hard to get past a grand jury.
Yep.
You don't need that much evidence to say it's more than likely that these people did it. So then, bam, you're on trial for your life. It's a scary proposition, no doubt about it.
And like you said, we've covered enough to know that it happens.
And Morph and I have covered we did a whole season.
Yeah.
On exonerations, and they find the real killer. DNA links the real killer later on. It really is scary. All right, Gibbs, let's take a quick break to talk about our sponsors. And I want to start off with The Real Real. You can own iconic luxury items at unreal values with The Real Real. And we're talking about designers like Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Rolex, Cartier, and hundreds more at up to 90% off retail. They employ over 100 brand authenticators, art curators, gemologists from around the world who inspect these items every day, so you can be sure that every item is 100% authentic. So you can shop, but you can also consign your own things, women's and men's luxury fashion, as well as fine jewelry, watches, art, and home. You can shop online, but you can also visit one of their stores. They have one in Soho, West Hollywood. New customers receive an automatic $25 off at checkout. And I've talked about it before, but I'm into watches. So I'm browsing some of the Tag Heuer watches. The next thing I know, my wife is looking at a Louis Vuitton bag. There are some amazing things out there, and the prices are unreal. So shop in store, online, or download the app and get 20% off select items with the promo code REAL. Go to therealreal.com and use the promo code REAL for 20% off select items. And we have to talk about BetterHelp. Listen, if there's something out there that's interfering with your happiness, something that's preventing you from achieving your goals, BetterHelp Online Counseling can help you. They offer licensed professional counselors who are specialized in a number of issues: depression, anxiety, trauma, grief, and so much more. You can connect with your professional counselor in a safe and private online environment. Anything you share is confidential, and you can do it all at your own time and pace. They offer secure video and phone sessions along with chat and text. And if for some reason you're not happy with your counselor, you can request a new one at any time for no additional charge. But best of all, this is a truly affordable option. True Crime All the Time Unsolved listeners get 10% off your first month with the discount code TCAT. So why not get started today? Go to betterhelp.com/TCAT. Then just fill out a questionnaire. That helps them assess your needs, and it also helps them match you up with the right counselor. That's betterhelp.com/TCAT. Damien, Jason, and Jessie all pleaded not guilty. The prosecution came out quickly and said, you know what? We are going for the death penalty for all three of them. It was decided that Damien and Jason would be tried together, but Jessie would be tried separately. And this is something that Jason Baldwin's attorney didn't like at all. He tried desperately to have them tried separately, but he couldn't make it work, right? He got overruled. I think the thought process there was that he didn't want his client associated with all of the things that he knew were going to come out against Damien. There was a ton of information from Jessie's confession leaked to the press, broadcast out to the people. You had Mark Byers on television talking about his son's testicles being found in a jar in Damien's room. Now, this wasn't true, but there was all kinds of rumors and speculations of things like that.
And it didn't take long for that to spread, as soon as they start talking about that, and just the fact that they had the fear in the community already.
Sure.
It didn't take much to believe that would be true.
Well, I think spread throughout West Memphis very quickly, probably spread to neighboring towns, who knows how far, pretty quickly. This is a case that would grab people's attention, right? 3 young boys killed. You're talking about Satanism, animal sacrifice, being in a cult. But you figure, Gibbs, there was so much publicity in this case. No way could they hold it in West Memphis, right? So Jessie's trial was moved about 120 miles north to the town of Corning. And then the trial for Damien and Jason was moved about 60 miles north to the town of Jonesboro. But Jessie's up first. And you had Detective Ridge, Inspector Gitchell testified about Jessie's confession. Of course, that's the big thing, right? That's the linchpin. And they played the audio tape, some of which you've heard here. And it's damning stuff. There's no way around it. We just talked about, right? The whole area thinks that these 3 teenagers were in a cult, thinks they worship the devil, and here's Jessie in his own words, essentially saying the very same thing on tape.
Yeah, he's confirming everything that the public believes.
Yeah. And of course, he implicated Damien and Jason, but he's the only one on trial at this point. And what he said, he did. Right, in restraining Michael Moore and bringing him back, that was enough to put him away. Detectives on the stand talked about the injuries the boys sustained and said on the stand that it appeared as though the penis of Christopher Byers had been removed. Jessie's defense spent a lot of their time arguing about the confession and the fact that they thought it was coerced. They brought a number of witnesses who testified that Jessie was at the trailer park, then later at a wrestling match the night of the murders. Jessie's father took the stand, said he got home at 7:15 that night. Jessie was home. He said Jessie left for the wrestling match about 15 minutes later. Now, he also said he knew it was May 5th because that was the first day of his mandatory DWI school. So, take that for what it's worth.
Yeah.
But I guess that sticks in your head a little bit.
A little bit.
If he wasn't drunk on the way back from his mandatory DWI school.
What was it? Big if?
Oh, yeah, big if. Capital I.
Capital I.
But I will say, the alibis of all three of these boys. I know right now we're just talking about Jesse's trial. They've been picked apart over the years quite a bit. There's a lot of people that do not believe the wrestling match that people say Jessie was at even took place on that night. We'll get into it, but Damien and Jason aren't going to have great alibis either.
Right. Alibis are very tough to stick.
They can be. My wife and I were actually talking about that the other night. We were watching something about, I can't remember what documentary or what show it was. And I said, it would be brutal, because if a murder happened at midnight and somehow I was implicated, I would be nowhere else but sitting here in my house, as I am just about every midnight of every night in the history of my life. But my wife's asleep. My 2 kids are asleep. Who's going to prove that I didn't leave the house between this time and that time?
It's difficult.
It can be very difficult.
That's where the only thing you could hope for is that somehow you're caught on video nowhere near the crime scene.
So somehow I'm caught on video inside my own house?
Well, I mean, that's where you maybe you went out to the local speedway to get
No, but
yourself.
I'm saying I never went anywhere.
But if you never go anywhere, I don't know how you can get like you said, your wife's asleep, your kids are asleep. You leave your phone here. They could say you left your phone at home.
Sure. I mean, let's say I'm not on the internet.
But even if you are on the internet, they could argue that your kids were on the internet, not you.
I'm not on an internet gaming thing where I've seen some people use that as an alibi.
Yeah, that's just difficult.
It is. It can be very difficult. The defense had a number of experts. They had one expert on police interrogations. They had another expert on false confessions. These were pretty well-respected guys. And they both pointed out the inconsistencies in Jesse's confession. Most notably what we talked about, the time differences and the rope versus shoelaces. But neither of these guys were allowed to give their full testimony, right? The prosecution made an argument against it. The judge ruled against the defense. So they were able to say certain things. They weren't allowed to say everything they wanted to say. For example, the expert on false confessions was not allowed to come out and say that he believed these were coerced.
He wasn't allowed to give his expert opinion, huh?
Not fully.
Not fully.
They let him go a certain ways, but they wouldn't let him say everything he wanted to say. Jesse didn't take the stand.
That's advisable.
Well, how could you let Jesse take the stand?
Yeah.
I mean, after hearing what he has said on tape, most defense attorneys won't let educated individuals take the stand. They just don't see a lot in it. There's too much that can go wrong. There is a lot that could go wrong with Jesse on the stand.
Yeah.
But his defense attorney closed with the argument that Jesse wasn't at the scene of the crime and the state didn't have a shred of evidence putting him there. They didn't have fingerprints, footprints, hairs. They didn't have a single piece of physical evidence. They also didn't have an eyewitness who could put Jesse at the crime scene.
Yeah, but I think the problem is that they got him confessing.
Sure. You don't need physical evidence and you don't need an eyewitness. Jesse was his own eyewitness.
Yeah.
He said, I was there. And that's why I said his confession is the linchpin, right? Not only for him, but it's going to carry over into the trial of Damien and Jason. I mean, you can make the argument, if Jesse doesn't confess, none of these three are ever arrested. I think you can make that argument. But his defense attorney's argument, it just didn't matter, right? We talked about it. The state had Jesse's confession, and they closed with the statement that Michael Moore would have gone home to his family safe and sound had it not been for Jessie Misskelley Jr. He said Jesse didn't let Michael Moore get away. He chased him down like an animal. And that's kind of hard to argue with if you believe the confession is real.
That's the problem, right? Is they didn't get the expert to be able to say The confession's not really.
And even if he had, Gibbs, I really don't know if it would have changed anything.
And it might not have.
I do believe that a person confessing on tape is extremely powerful to a jury.
No, I get that, because I think most jurors would say, you're only saying now you were coerced because your attorney said you should never have done that.
Yeah.
We got to get you out of this.
Something bad's going to happen to you.
Yeah. So
I agree. I think a lot of people think, why would anyone confess if they didn't do it? The problem is, we now know over the last 20, 25 years that false confessions happen all the time.
yeah, it's been proven.
The prosecution didn't call Buddy Lucas, but the defense didn't call Buddy Lucas either. The prosecution really couldn't after he recanted. And Jesse's defense attorney later said that he just felt Buddy was way too nervous and all over the place.
Could have undone any good that the defense attorney made. Any movement forward that the defense attorney made, this could have backtracked it.
Well, and there was talk that Buddy Lucas mentally was operating at a level even lower than Jesse.
Yeah, and so that's somebody you don't want on the stand. Just because the manipulation that could occur, it's tough enough to be on the stand and being drilled, even if you're somebody that's seasoned.
Yeah, and you have your wits about you. You can get tripped up.
Absolutely.
Easily.
So if you don't have that and you're less intelligent, then you can definitely see how they can manipulate you into or lead you to where they want you to go.
But that didn't stop the prosecution from talking about Jesse giving Buddy the shoes he wore on May 5th, 1993 in front of the jury. So they got that out there. The jury was convinced by the confession, and they convicted Jesse on February 4th, 1994 of 1 count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life plus 40 years. One of the jurors later told a paper that whole cult thing, the whole Satanism thing, it didn't have anything to do with it. He said, quote, "To be honest with you, it wouldn't have mattered to us if there was a cult or not."
He's just saying, based on the facts alone, the fact that he chased the kid down, brought him back, and the kid lost his life, that's all I needed to hear.
Well, you say fact. The fact that Jesse said that.
Yes. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
And it was just less than a month later that Damien Echols and Jason Baldwin went on trial in front of the same judge that presided over Jesse's case. Now, the only way that Jesse's confession could be used in Damien and Jason's trial is if he took the stand and testified against them. I talked in part 1 about the documentary Paradise Lost, and they had unbelievable access. I think it's what makes it so compelling. You get to see snippets of testimony inside the courtroom in both trials, but they also had tremendous access to the families on both sides of the case, as well as the attorneys. And there's this one scene in that first Paradise Lost where the prosecutors are talking to the family of the victims, and they're telling them that they really need Jesse's confession and they need his testimony to solidify a conviction against Damien and Jason. It's real inside type stuff that the cameras are picking up because it gives you a glimpse into just how little evidence they really had against the 2 teenagers. One of the prosecutors pegged the odds of convicting the 2 boys without Jesse and his confession at 50-50.
Yeah.
So basically he's saying it's a coin flip.
It was interesting because when we just said a minute ago how they had all this access for this Paradise Lost, and I know the judge toyed with it and made the final decision to allow it, but I also know that after the fact, he would say that, looking back at all this, that he wished that he would have said no.
Yeah. And he would never do it again.
And never would do it again.
So Jesse makes the decision that he's not going to testify. So you would think, Gibbs, right, without Jesse's testimony against Damien and Jason, without his confession, given the lack of physical evidence, as admitted by the prosecution, you would think they would have a very tough uphill battle to convict these two teenagers. They don't have Damien and Jason on tape saying they did it. And I do believe the prosecution started to get extremely worried about this. They began pressuring Jessie to testify. It's been alleged that they made promises to him that his girlfriend could visit him in jail for sex, that they bought him cigarettes, bought him alcohol, and they promised him a reduced sentence. Now, obviously, they have said none of this happened, but they did get Jessie alone without his court-appointed attorneys and got him to confess again. This is what is known by a lot of people as Jessie's second confession or subsequent confession after his conviction. His father wasn't there. His court-appointed attorneys weren't there. And Jessie ultimately gave another statement to authorities backing up his previous admission on tape. He also agreed to testify against Damien and Jason, but then later on decided not to. So depending on what side you believe, there could have been some real shady shit went down here. So now again, prosecutors are facing that uphill battle, or are they? And that's really what's going to come out at this trial of Damien and Jason. So let's break down what the prosecution presented in court. Same prosecutors that went after Jessie in his trial. And they started out speaking to the jury, telling them that the state would prove through scientific evidence and the statements of these own defendants that they caused the deaths of Michael Moore, Stevie Branch, and Chris Byers. But they played so heavily on the occult and the satanic worship angle. They portrayed Damien Echols as a satanic killer who had no emotions. And they portrayed Jason Baldwin as his loyal follower, right? The guy that would do whatever Damien told him to do. The prosecution told the jury, as bizarre and unfamiliar as Satanism may seem, this occult set of beliefs and the beliefs that Damien had and his best friend Jason was exposed to all the time, those are the set of beliefs that were the motive or the basis for causing these bizarre murders. The prosecution had an expert in the occult, a guy by the name of Dr. Dale Griffiths. He testified that in his opinion, there was no doubt these murders were motivated by occult beliefs and most likely part of a satanic ritual.
Yeah, but I mean, come on, he's going to talk about wearing black. He's going to talk about heavy metal bands. I mean, to say that all those things are consistent with being involved with Satanism?
Well, if that's true, there are a whole bunch of people involved in Satanism.
Yeah, exactly.
Because now it might not have been that normal in West Memphis, Arkansas in 1993, 1994. I graduated in 1991. There was a lot of kids already wearing black and
hell yeah.
A lot of kids that wore Metallica t-shirts and had long hair. And I never thought any of them were conducting satanic rituals and sacrificing animals.
No, I didn't think so either.
I just thought they liked Metallica or Black Sabbath or whoever. Stuff that I didn't listen to, but whatever.
Well, you know, just because you didn't like Ozzy, it's all right.
No, I wasn't a big Ozzy
a little
fan.
Crazy Train going on.
I do like Crazy Train, but that's about it.
Yeah.
of his stuff.
All right. No Judas Priest. No.
I just wasn't a big fan of
Run to the Hills
of the heavy metal.
Yeah.
But never once did I think, like I said, these guys are into, you know, some shady stuff just because of the music that they listen to or the fact that their hair was longer than mine. But I do think that this doctor, and I'm using doctor in quotes, and I'll tell you why in a minute, I think he made a big impact with the jury.
No, he did. And I don't know if it was the right impact, though. I don't know if it was a fair impact.
No, I don't think it was at all. I don't think what he said, you know, so there were a number of books found in Damien's room that dealt with witchcraft, Wicca, There was one that had this Wiccan pentagram on it, had a bunch of upside down crosses that Damien apparently had drawn on it. They made a big deal about all of that. They talked about some books and specifically about Anton LaVey. They even talked about some Stephen King books.
Yeah, they're bringing Stephen King books into it as well.
Shit, I've read every Stephen King book there is.
Yeah.
So when you say, I don't think it made the right impact, I think it was impactful to the jury. I just don't see how you hear what this guy has to say and then transfer it to the fact that these individuals had anything to do with the murders. That's the part that I can never figure out.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're different. They're strange. They're weird by West Memphis, Arkansas standards.
Exactly.
But how do you take that with the physical evidence that we're going to talk about here in a minute and transfer that into, well, they must have done X?
Yeah, because let me tell you why. Here it is. Here's the books. They got the black T-shirts,
the long hair.
Maybe they wear mascara. I don't know.
Yeah, there was talk of Damien drinking blood, and later on he's going to say, I licked it. I didn't drink it. But I just think the prosecution used all this to hammer home their theory that Damien was into Satanism. They also had Griffiths tie aspects of the murders to satanic cults. He talked about the number of the victims, 3. He said that was powerful in Satanism. The fact that the bodies were discovered near water, that was powerful.
Another tie-in
in Satanism.
Yeah.
The fact that they were 8 years old, that was powerful.
Yeah.
The numbers 3 and 8.
I think no matter what the numbers were, he could have found a way to tie them in to some critical part in that arena. And I also think, remember, this jury are people from the Bible Belt.
Oh yeah, you made that great point in part 1.
Anytime you talk about Satan,
you sound like the church lady.
Yeah,
right then.
Yeah, didn't I?
Could it be Satan?
But I think you're going to always, get the brow lift, and they're going to sit up and listen a little bit deeper and have more concerns. Because let's face it, in the Bible Belt, they're going to believe really hard and deep about there is Satan, and this is how he will come into the life of people and this guy's feeding that. He's feeding that fear.
Yeah. Again, I think it was impactful. But at the same time, Jason Baldwin's attorney, he did a really good job of questioning this so-called expert and his credibility. He got him to admit that he obtained both his master's and PhD without ever attending a single class. So apparently he got them through like some type of mail order thing.
What if we're alumni together?
Because you got all your shit through mail order.
Yeah.
So to me, I thought he did a great job. But again, I think to the jury, he was impactful. The things that he said really struck home with them. And the fact that he got his credibility or his accreditation through the mail, I don't think they cared.
No, I don't think so either. I think we're now headed down this path.
And that path is Damien and by extension, Jason, right? Wore black, listened to heavy metal music. They weren't like the rest of us, quote unquote, normal people. They must have done it.
Well, there's no other reason why.
And I mentioned that Jessie's confession made its way into this trial. It shouldn't have, but it did. It was mentioned by Detective Ridge while he was being cross-examined about some evidence at the crime scene, and he brought it up. Jessie's statement. Damien's attorney immediately asked for a mistrial. Jason's attorney said that blurting out the fact that Jessie Misskelley gave a confession was extremely prejudicial to the jury. Hard to argue with that fact. But the judge didn't buy it. And here's why. He said, there isn't a soul up on that jury or in this courtroom that doesn't know Mr. Misskelley gave a statement. And it's hard to disagree with that.
It is.
I think everybody knew. For towns, states, I don't know what the radius was. Everybody by that time knew that Jessie had given a confession that implicated Damien and Jason in the murders. So it shouldn't have been allowed to have been introduced at all at the trial. It was in a small way. But again, I don't think it would have mattered. I think every single one of those jurors went into that trial knowing that Jessie was convicted. He gave a confession. He said Damien and Jason did it. Hard to get that out of your head, even though you're supposed to. The medical examiner testified to the injuries on the three boys' bodies. A lot of time, Gibbs, was spent talking about injuries to Christopher Byers' penis. Very graphic photos, right, were shown during this trial. There was a lot of times I think that the parents had to leave. It was just too much for them. And I believe Jason Baldwin's attorney did two things pretty well. He got the medical examiner to agree that it would have been difficult for a layman to remove the skin and the head of the penis in the way it was done in the dark, and especially if it was done in the water. He also got him to admit that there should have been a substantial amount of blood at the crime scene. Given the injuries that these boys sustained, and this is something that comes up a lot in this case. Where was all the blood?
Yeah.
Did it wash away in the water, or were these boys killed somewhere else and their bodies left in that drainage ditch? Now, you will find information out there online that talks about the fact that there was blood at the scene. You couldn't see it. It had soaked in. Luminol was used and the area lit up like a Christmas tree.
Yeah.
Again, I think that's part of the problem with this case, is deciphering what information is correct and what is not.
That's it. Exactly it. What's factual and what is created in the rumor mill.
Because we go back to episode 1 or part 1, the crime scene was handled in such a way that it really casts a lot of shadows on pretty much all the evidence. But something big came out in this trial, and it was information about a knife that belonged to Mark Byers. So apparently this was a knife that he gave to the documentary filmmakers that were doing Paradise Lost. This guy was a big part of the film. So for anybody that's seen it, he was a bigger than life character.
He's in a lot of the clips.
Yeah, I think purposefully, because he said a bunch of, off the wall stuff. You couldn't take your eyes off this guy.
No, kind of annoying.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Like a train wreck, like one of those things, a car wreck. Like you don't want to see it, but you can't look away.
Wasn't favorable for him.
No, and he wasn't happy, I don't think, after the documentary came out about how he was portrayed.
Yeah.
But I don't think anybody forced him to say some of the totally off the wall stuff he did.
No, I think it was all him.
So he gave them this knife. Obviously, he spent a lot of time with these people, had gotten to know them while the documentary was being made. So they get this knife from him, and they saw what appeared to be blood on it, and they turned it over to police. So it became part of the trial. Gary Gitchell testified that he turned it into the crime lab to be analyzed. An expert from the crime lab testified that there was blood found on the knife, and that testing revealed that it was the same type as that of both Mark Byers and Chris Byers. So remember, they're not related, right? He adopted
stepdad
Chris.
Right.
But apparently they had the same blood type. As it relates to the trial, Damien's attorney was able to get the medical examiner to admit that some of the injuries to the boys could have come from this knife. But to me, Gibbs, I'm thinking they could have come from thousands of other serrated knives.
I think it was a common hunting knife that he had. So I'm not surprised.
I think it was a fairly common type of knife.
Yeah.
I'm sure thousands and thousands of people in the area owned a knife similar to that. And that's if the medical examiner is right about his opinions on the injuries to the boys. I mean, that's one thing you have to keep in mind.
Well, that's true. You have that angle as well.
that's something that's going to come into question later on. Were some of these lacerations and things that the Emmy listed knife wounds at all? And was the head of Christopher Byers' penis severed with something like a knife by someone? Or did something else happen? Stuff we're going to talk about later on.
Yeah, there's definitely some other conclusions somebody could make.
Sure. And I think they do make them. But at the time that this trial's going on, they weren't made. And that's why I don't want to dive too deeply in it. I want to keep it with the information that was known during the trial.
During the time of the trial. I got you.
But because of all this, Mark Byers was called to the stand and he became a part of the trial. He was questioned by both the prosecution and the defense. At one point he said he had used the knife to cut some venison, but the defense attorneys were able to get their hands on a transcribed interview that occurred early on between Inspector Gitchell and Mark Byers. And in this interview, Mark told Gitchell he had never used the knife before at all. He had no idea how blood could be on it. But again, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. We are going to talk very in depth about Mark Byers, most likely in the next episode. Now, the prosecution used some of Damien's own words in interviews against him at trial. In an interview with one of the investigators, he said, "The person who committed the crimes must have felt powerful when they killed these boys." Prosecution made a lot out of that.
Sure they did.
They said Damien made statements in interviews that only the killer could have known. The problem is, a lot of these statements, they weren't on video. They weren't even on audio. They just didn't record a lot of their conversations. So Damien gets on the stand and says, I said this and I said this, but I didn't say this, this, and this.
It's a him versus them is what it comes down to.
It does. I mean, you can look at it as a he said.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is you're pitting a respected detective, investigator, inspector against an 18-year-old kid who's painted as a cult member and a Satanist. If you got to pick between those two sides, which one are you picking? Damien said there were certain things that he didn't say. And the prosecution said, so you saying that this detective made this stuff up? Damien said, well, I wouldn't put it past him. So now let's look at some of the physical evidence. And it's not going to take long because there wasn't much. The prosecution introduced evidence of fibers found in Damien's house that they said were microscopically similar to one found on the victim's clothing. Similar, but no way to say conclusively that they were the same fibers. And the defense argued, I think pretty successfully, that these were very common fibers found in, many different types of clothing. And then there's the mysterious knife. So it was about 5 months after the teens were arrested. The police recovered a knife from a lake behind Jason Baldwin's home that they said, and I'm using quotes here, could have been the cause of some of the injuries to the three boys. Could have been. There was no way to, again, conclusively say that it was this knife or another knife, or really, in fact, Gibbs, any knife. So theoretically, I could kick the Rock's ass.
Okay.
Theoretically.
Maybe.
But that's not a theory that I'm willing to bet my life on.
Yeah. I'd like to see it, though.
Well, obviously we know it wouldn't happen, but theoretically I could.
You could.
He could slip and fall.
Yeah.
I could get the upper hand.
David and Goliath, man.
There could be a lucky punch. There could be all kinds of things.
Yeah.
So to say that this knife could have been the knife, I just don't know what type of evidence that really is.
It's not much, but
it's not much at all.
It's still a plant. You're still planting it in the juror's mind.
Oh, well, you said it's a plant. There are people that argue it really was a plant, that the police knew about this knife well before they went and got it. And they also knew that the knife was had been in there for over a year, well before the murders even took place.
Yeah.
So, but you're right. To me, it's not really evidence, but you're putting it in the mind of the juries.
Sure.
That this knife, which was found right behind this guy's house, could have been the murder weapon or the cause of some of the injuries.
That's all it takes. And for some people.
For some people, sure. So now let's get into hearsay evidence against the boys. So there was a 12-year-old girl and a 15-year-old girl that testified at a girls' softball game. They overheard Damien say he killed the 3 boys and that he was planning to kill more. Damien's attorney on cross of these girls was able to get them to admit that, the game was very noisy. For some reason, they could remember this one statement, but couldn't remember anything else that was said that day. Didn't remember Damien saying anything other than these incriminating words.
That's it.
That's it. There was a mother and her child testified to seeing Damien and his girlfriend at a truck stop, not that far from where the bodies were discovered. The night that these murders, were alleged to have taken place, and they said that they were covered in mud. Then you have Michael Carson. Michael Carson was a 16-year-old that was in jail, I believe on drug charges. And he testified that Jason Baldwin made a jailhouse confession to him. He said Jason told him he killed one of the victims and sucked his blood.
So really what you're saying, the state's case in the nutshell is that they're just some deviant teenagers?
Yeah, that a few people say they heard confess to the crimes. There were a couple of pieces of physical evidence that really don't conclusively prove anything. And I want to go back to Michael Carson for a minute. Jason's attorney, cross-examined him and said something to the effect of, so you're telling me that this boy, Jason, that you didn't know at all, he didn't know you, is just all of a sudden going to come out to you and say, you know what? I killed these boys.
Yeah. Hey, stranger, I'm going to tell you something.
While I'm waiting in jail to go on trial for my life.
Yeah. Let me just pour my heart out to you.
Now, the conspiracy theorists would say what, Gibbs? The prosecution needed somebody to say they heard Jason say he killed these boys.
Sure.
Because we've talked this whole time. What have we said that the prosecution has said about Jason? Other than the fact that they found the knife close to his house?
That's it.
Other than he was a friend of Damien Echols. That's it.
A follower.
Or a follower, yeah.
Yeah. And they know if they can get somebody to say anything, no matter how credible the source is, once it's said,
once it's out there,
it's going to lock into some of the jury's minds.
Yeah, you can't pull it back once it's out there. So like I said, the conspiracy theorists would say the prosecution got this boy to say this in exchange for something, right? Probably making a piece of his legal troubles go away.
Yeah.
Or lessen them. But that's it. I mean, that's the state's case in a nutshell. Damien took the stand and his attorney had him explain the reason behind him changing his name to Damien. We kind of touched on that a little bit in part 1, but he also had him explain his association with Wicca, the differences between some of these things that the prosecution were calling occultish type things. I know that's not a word, but I'm using it anyway.
Yeah, I remember at some point in the trial, they were really hammering him on some of the quotes inside of his Wicca books and things like that. But when they asked him what those meant, he was able to, some of those were quotes out of some very famous novels. And, he was able to explain that. And I think it was, I don't know if the prosecution really knew what to say at that point.
Yeah, Damien's kind of an enigmatic guy. I mean, you can look at him in some of the footage and say, I think he was pretty intelligent. I also think he was a little arrogant, a little smarmy. I don't know how he came across to the jury. He did absolutely deny his involvement in the murders. The attorneys for both Damien and Jason hammered home to the jury that The prosecution had presented a weak circumstantial case with no physical evidence. But they took it a step further. They accused the police of conducting a very poor investigation. They said that they had tunnel vision. They focused on one person. And that one person was Damien Echols. And they ignored evidence that suggested anyone else committed these murders. And to back that point up, they introduced a possible suspect that many would call Mr. Bojangles. And I don't want to talk about it a lot. I'm saving a lot of this suspect type stuff for the next episode. But as it relates to this trial, there was a man seen inside the Bojangles restaurant.
Best biscuits ever.
Chicken and biscuits.
And their biscuits are good.
And this restaurant was not far from where the boys were found. The man was reported to police because he was disoriented. He was covered in mud and blood. He was a mess. And he was in the women's restroom for a long period of time. Manager was, seriously concerned. So he called the police, but the police did a very poor job in checking into this. The night it was reported, it was said that, the officer drove through the drive-thru, said, "Hey, what's going on?" and left. Now, they will go back later and check it out. But again, details we'll get into in the next episode. Damien's attorney said at closing, the state hasn't proved that Damien Echols killed anyone on May 5th, 1993. Jason's attorney said the police pinned this crime on the wrong boy because they were blindfolded and their evidence shows it. So everybody rested. The jury starts their deliberations in the case on March 17th, 1994. It was just the next day. They came back with their verdict and they found both Damien and Jason guilty of capital murder in the deaths of Chris Byers, Michael Moore, and Stevie Branch. So then you get to the second phase of the trial, the punishment phase. The jury listened to evidence related to aggravated and mitigating circumstances for each of the defendants. They listened to hours of testimony, a lot of it concerning Damien's mental state, statements he had made to a therapist. We talked about some of that in episode 1.
Right.
And apparently what happened was the jury retired to the jury room and they began making pros and cons lists for both Jason and Damien. For Jason, he got some pros, right? They said he stuck to his story, he exhibited remorse, and he was in school. But he got a bunch of cons, right? Damien's best friend, his so-called jailhouse confession, low self-esteem, and he frequented the crime scene. Damien got pros for being intelligent and for having a loyal family and for sticking to his story. But he had a very long list of negative, manipulative, dishonest, satanic follower, weird, he had something to gain, blew kisses to his parents, inappropriate thought patterns. In the end, the jurors decided to sentence Jason to life in prison without the opportunity for parole.
Yeah.
He's 16 years old.
Yeah. Life. Forever.
You're never getting out.
Nope.
But they decided Damien should die by lethal injection. And just 3 days later, the judge sentenced Damien to death and Jason to life in prison.
Based off a pro-cons list?
No,
No.
I think that's how they were. I don't know. I guess they were used. You can go out there and see it. I've seen the actual scribbled pros and cons. Somebody must have kept them or something.
That's just, the con, weird con.
Yeah. So I guess my opinions, Gibbs, as we kind of wrap this up a little bit. Number one, I don't think that Damien did himself any favors during the trial. I think his attitude came through in some spots, and he seemed pretty cavalier during some of his testimony. He even admitted at one point to his attorney that at certain points while he was on the stand, he was daydreaming, not really paying attention to the questions being asked.
And I think that comes to their youth, for one. And I think they got maybe not the best advice to how to appear during a very serious trial. I mean, you got Jessie with his head down the whole time, didn't look good, didn't come across well at all. And then you got Damien coming across kind of cocky at some points. And I don't think that's how you want to be portrayed when you are looked as the bad guy in a triple homicide.
No, I don't think it is, but I would probably bet money that his attorney said to do something different. And I think that was just Damien.
Yeah. No, I think that was him.
I truly believe that. I think people looked at Damien as someone who was into this occult type stuff, right? Obviously, he was into some of this stuff. He was into Wicca, white magic, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, for sure.
And they looked at it and they said, you know what? This is a guy that could be behind these murders. Now, Jason didn't testify. And, you know, like I said, there really was nothing presented against him in court other than the fact that he was friends with Damien. There is one troubling thing that we really haven't talked a lot about, and that's the alibis, right? For Damien and Jason. And neither, you know, we did a little bit early on, but neither of them had great alibis. And it does seem as though Damien's kind of changed and morphed over time. I think this hurt them both at trial. We didn't spend a lot of time on it, but my thought is that the jury wanted to hear that they couldn't have committed the murders because they were doing X at this time, and it could be corroborated by these people. And they didn't hear that. It's something that they really couldn't do, and I think it hurt them big time. But at the end of the day, when you're on trial for your life, I think, Gibbs, you'd like to believe that it takes more than what was presented against these two boys at trial to take your life away from you. I really struggle with that. Separate out the fact of whether you believe they did it or not. Just looking at what was presented at trial, I don't see how you could say beyond a reasonable doubt, I think these boys did it. You just haven't shown me enough to make me believe that. I don't know. What do you think?
I would just hope that if you're going to have to serve the rest of your life, like you just said, in prison or death, that there would just be more solid information behind it.
I think you better prove that I did it. And if you can't prove I did it, let me go. Let me go home.
I mean, it seems like there was plenty of reasonable doubt.
Yeah, you would think. But that's it. That's it for the second part in this case. But Gibbs, we're far from done. You know, I keep hinting on things that we're going to be talking about in part 3. We're going to get into some of the new revelations that come out over the years. We're going to dive into some alternative suspects, some that we've mentioned, some we haven't really talked much about at all yet.
Right.
Purposefully, I didn't want to talk about them too much. I want to save it for the time where we can really do a deep dive on them.
Dive into it the right way.
All right, we got some voicemails. You want to hear those?
Yeah, let's hear them.
Hi, guys. This is Angel from Greeley, Colorado. I binge listen to all your podcasts all day, almost 11 hours a day, every day at work, and I truly say I love it. I just wanted to leave a message. I just now got into your True Crime All the Time Unsolved. I just finished the story of Ashley Fallis. I cannot believe how close to home that is. I'm right here in Greeley, and Evans is right here in smack dab in the middle of Greeley. And it's amazing just to see how small the world is, to see how crazy people really are. But yeah, I just wanted to call and say thank you for the podcast. You guys are amazing. You keep me entertained all day, every day. And yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks. Bye.
All right. We appreciate that voicemail.
Yeah, love it.
Greeley, Colorado.
Greeley.
So I agree with her. It is strange to find out, right, about a case that you really didn't know and find out that it happened in your neck of the woods. We hear that a lot. I also admire her work ethic. I mean, she works 11 hours a day. I mean, that's 7 hours more than you work.
Hey, now, come on. Wait, me more than you.
Yeah, I know. I was waiting for you to see. You should have jumped on that. You should have been ahead of me.
I was trying to be nice.
No, you're not nice. You want to play nice on the podcast.
I'm nice, man.
You want to be Mr. Rogers Gibson.
How cool would that be to be the new Mr. Rogers?
Hey, you know there's a new Netflix documentary on Mr. Rogers?
Is there?
Yeah, I haven't watched it yet. I'd check it out.
Hope it's not like going to be like, oh man, he did what?
No, I don't think
okay.
I don't think it's true crime. I think it's just
just the back scene.
Yeah,
stuff.
just a thing on his life. Man, I used to watch that show when I was little. That and Sesame Street and Electric Company.
You still watch some of that stuff. I catch you sometimes.
I might.
Gibby and Ferguson. This is Jenny from Chicago, and I cannot believe how much I love your podcast. My fiance and I were just talking about it. I got him into it, and we were saying how we wish there was a True Crime All the Time TV show, because that would be the best thing ever. And I probably shouldn't do this, but I have an infant, and when we drive to school, I'm always listening to True Crime all the time. So fingers crossed we don't have bedwetting, animal abuse, things like that with him. Going to keep an eye on it. Probably once he starts talking, going to need to switch over to something a little more kid-friendly. But it's really hard to turn you guys off. You're awesome. Keep your own time ticking.
Man, we love that.
Jenny.
From the block.
Jenny.
You going Forrest Gump?
I did. I went Forrest Gump.
It wasn't even that great of a Forrest Gump. I got to be honest with you.
I still did it.
You did.
Don't be hating.
Now, let's be honest. The kid's going to wet the bed, and that's going to be normal.
Yeah, it's going to happen.
Yeah. People get on me sometimes through email when, we haven't talked about bedwetting in a while, but on TCAT, we talk about bedwetting a lot. And, bedwetting's normal. It happens. I think where that comes into play is when it goes past what most people consider to be normal, but that can happen too. Some people wet the bed longer than.
Sometimes it's a territorial thing. Someone keeps creeping over on your side. I guarantee you wet the bed a few times, they won't come over to your side anymore.
You were the kid that was invited to stay over at somebody's house, and you would just mark your territory. Is that what you're saying?
I'm just saying in general life, even as adults. Hey, if you don't want your wife creeping up on you in the middle of the night, snuggling up, wet the bed. She won't do it again.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to go down that road. I'd like to stay married.
Yeah.
And not give half my stuff away.
Well, that's true. Be more than half, by the way.
Yeah. I'm being optimistic.
Hey, guys. This is Stephen from Ohio. I had to make a comment on the Cindy James episode, and this is aimed at Mike right now, but I've heard of a person stalking another person, and I've heard of nylon stockings, but I've never heard of nylon stalkings. So I was just wondering if that was similar or something else or type thing, but after you corrected Gibby on wolf and woof, you can't get away with that. All right, see you guys.
All right, so first of all, we love Steven.
I like how he had my back on this one.
And I like the fact that Steven is coming out of his shell.
Yeah, that's
calling
true too.
Me out.
Well, somebody needs to.
Somebody needs to. You're not man enough to step up and do it.
No, you just edit me out.
I do not edit you out.
All the time.
I try to get you to. See, you're supposed to be the one that says, hey, you can't say that. You're doing it wrong. Then I would know to edit it out or re-say it.
I do.
But you're not paying attention.
Oh, I say it. It just never.
You are so full of it.
Bleep, bleep.
So hopefully Steven listened to the TCAT episode as well and heard the voicemail about him, which was very nice.
It was.
But I love the fact that he's coming out of his shell and he's not afraid to call me on the carpet.
Keep doing it.
Hi, guys. My name's Andrea. I'm from Lafayette, Louisiana, and I've been listening to your podcast for probably like a year now, but I don't do social media, so I'm kind of like a ghost. You can't see me. But I've been wanting to leave a voicemail for a long time. I just keep putting it off or forgetting or whatever, but I'm here listening or watching to the 2020 My Father BTK interview, and I just thought I had to leave a voicemail right now and let you know how much I love the show. I listen every day. I don't know what I'm going to do when I catch up on Unsolved. I've already listened to all of TCAT. But thank you guys a lot for what you do and for who you are. You just have a really great positive energy, and I just love to listen to you guys, even though you're talking about really sick shit. So thank you for what you do and for what you put out into the world, and when it can be a really dark place sometimes. And keep your own time ticking.
We will do it. Appreciate that. Andrea, hopefully she makes it to CrimeCon.
Yeah.
It's in her Not too far from
Louisiana. We'll be there.
All right, Gibbs. That's it.
That's done.
For another episode of True Crime All Time Unsolved. Obviously, we'll be back next week.
Yeah.
With part 3. I think that will wrap it up, but I'm not 100% sure yet.
We'll know when we get there.
We'll know when we get there. But for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking. Hey, TCAT listeners, don't forget about The Real Real. Luxury items from top designers at up to 90% off retail. You can shop in store, online, download the app, get 20% off select items with the promo code REAL. Check out therealreal.com, promo code REAL.